Hello. Hi. Hola. Good news, I've discovered something tricky that we can use in Blender to make our flat images appear more professional. This is not the animation, but in fact an unprocessed still of fog traveling through a pine forest along the rise to a mountain peak that forms a bit of visual interest. You can see over on the right hand side that the sun is low and the shadows are deep and blue, and on the left hand side the sun is strong and the trees are ridiculous. But what about animated? Well, the fog is lifting out of the trees. The clouds are gracefully moving from right to left. And, believe it or not, there's a shadow that's happening over the landscape. And this is a 52-second animation. If you want a 52-second animation, all you have to do is go to the timeline and change the end time from 250 frames, which is default, to 1,250 frames, which is not default. Here's what we'll do in Blender. You can use your first layer or your second layer. Create an object that will be the domain of your volume. Control and spacebar can hide and reveal your 3D manipulator widget. And using keyboard shortcuts like G, Z, 1, and Enter will move your object up one Blender unit. Tab in to edit mode after you've created a material. Call that material something, whatever, volume. Go to wireframe mode, go to faces, select a face, and hit Shift D to make a duplicate along an axis that is perpendicular to the face. In this case, Y. I'll do this a couple times. Shift D and Y. Left click to commit. Shift D, Y. Left click. Shift D and Y again. What is that, 4? All right, Shift D and Y. We'll go one more. These are now 5 faces inside a cube. We're going to pretend that the cube, which I can select with a right click on its face and Control L to select everything that is attached to that, and so the cube is apart from the faces that we just duplicated. I'll make sure that that gets assigned the first material. I'll create a second material, and I'm just going to call it Volume 2. I'll hit Control I to invert my selection to those planes which are standing all by themselves. I'll assign that second material to them. My first is what we're jokingly calling the domain. I'm going to change its node type from the default diffuse to transparent. Now when we hit Shift Z and render, we don't see anything because I also have my light paths set to no transparency. There, now it's at 16. Now because I can see the edges of that domain, I know that my white is not perfectly white. When it is perfectly white, I can't see the edges of that domain. The reason I'm calling it domain is because if you ever use a smoke simulator in Blender, your smoke appears inside a big domain, and typically people use large cubes. So to create clouds or fog, as we have just seen here, you would create a giant domain over the entire mountain, and then you would spend ages trying to aim the fog down at the ground or up the slope of the mountain, and it would take a very long time. This is precisely what I'm teaching you how to fight. I'm going to give myself a tiny preview, and I'm going to do that up here in my outliner. I'm going to hit Shift Z to go back to just a whatever view, in this case solid view. I'm going to put my mouse up here in the outliner and hit Shift F5, and now in the 3D view I'm going to hit Shift F3, and N and T bring up and put back the little side bits. Shift and space to make it big, and change my lens to 70. I don't know why I don't just do this once and for all and then save that as a default file. Now, Shift Z. We're looking at the environment, which is providing light. I can turn that off. And we're not looking at the light because that is hidden. My sun lamp is hidden on layer 1. And the reason we're not looking at those is because I'm going to take the material output, and with Node Wrangler enabled, I can hit Shift S to switch that node type to a mix shader. I can feed that mix shader two different things. Shift A. One shader will be transparent. I will make absolutely sure that the white of my transparent is not partially white, but all the way white. I will hit Shift A and now add an emission shader. I will plug that emission in, and now I get to see a finished result here. What? That sucks. Okay, I know. This is just, the point where we should be. Let's take off the hard edges of our bounding box. Here's how we take off the hard edges. We're going to use a gradient texture in the factor of the mix shader. Shift A, texture, gradient texture. I could do one of two kinds using factor into factor. I could use spherical. And with Node Wrangler enabled, Control T will let me map that not as it's generated, but instead for the object. See something? Each circle is an MRI slice of a sphere because the sphere is mapping to that cube that we lovingly called the domain. Cool. Each sphere is a slice through the volume. Okay, let's change that over to texture and leave that for the time being. We're going to create one more object in here. Shift A, empty, plane axes. I might as well just move it to layer 1. We don't need to see it. We don't need to touch it. We don't need to name it. It's not going to twist or rotate or move or scale. It's not going to lick our faces and call us daddy. It's just going to sit there. I never have to do anything with it again. Now, let's go back to the material that we're creating. Think of the white that you're looking at with the emission shader as the location of potential. This location of potential, fog or volume or clouds or even sheets of rain if you're really clever with your shaders and textures, this potential has a pretty hard edge. The goal is to get rid of these hard edges so it doesn't betray the shape of the domain. I have discovered that spherical delivers hard edges on a sphere. Quadratic sphere delivers soft edges on the edge of a sphere. So we're still looking at a sphere, MRI slices of a sphere. All right. It's very exciting. I'm going to type in -1 on the Z. I'm now going to stretch these up by scaling this to 1.75. This will also work for you. What have we done? We've taken a sphere and moved the center of the sphere to the bottom plane of the cube. So we got a hemisphere of potential volume. And then we changed the scale so that hemisphere stretched up. Now, because this is not really a domain, we could slide one of those planes downward and it will still show the sphere. Because unlike a smoke simulation, this is not a true domain where the volume will only happen inside the cube. I mean, maybe that's helpful to you, maybe not. And if this is a little too ugly for this example, let's just cut it down to 1. So we're only using the bottom half of this cube because the sphere has been lowered. Now we understand that this is the potential. Let's mix a color into the gradient texture of quadratic sphere. So I'll move this aside. I'll hit Shift A. I'll go to color and mix RGB. I'm going to put it there. That slides into the first slot, and our second slot will be made black. We'll change it from mix to multiply. Now, we're going to add a texture, which is everybody's favorite for making clouds. I'm going to put it way over to the side here and use its factor in the factor of that mix color node. I'm going to hit Control T, and now I'm going to use object and a texture to map the noise texture. But wait, I'm not going to use the object that the material is on. So I'm going to specify the empty that we created. That empty doesn't rotate, doesn't move, doesn't scale. So that is our constant. If we want something to change, then we change the scale here. If we want the illusion of our volume to move, then we move its location over here. See how easy this is? There's still the appearance of a sphere. Let's hit Shift-A, Converter, Color Ramp, drop it in. Switch them. Don't ask why, just do it. Go to your first color flag, which is white, and change its position somewhere near the middle. Hey, look at this. Now we have blank spaces inside the potential of our hemisphere. Now we're beginning to break things up so it looks a lot more cloud-like or fog-like. You do whatever's right for you. I'm just doing this hopefully as a quick example. We're already like 13 minutes in or so, or 10 minutes or whatever I've edited it to. It's multiplying by 0. So here's the part to remember. You're not adding cloud. The cloud potential already existed. You are now subtracting cloud. You're adding negative space to that hemisphere of cloud potential. It's a little confusing for new users, and frankly, it's a little weird for me too, because you're tempted to add in cloud. What we're trying to do is take away. We're trying to eat away at cloud. Now get your detail so that it's something attractive. 4s and 6s have worked well for me. Scales, I just do, whatever it is that is called for. These scales were different than these scales, and there's another one up in a corner casting shadows on the landscape that had its own scale. And what is awesome is they all used the same empty, but they each had their own material, so all the changes took place for each object. Alright, I say awesome because give me a moment to set up a good amount of negative space here. When I turn around this, we see MRI cross-sections of what could be cloud volume. Let me add in the light. The light is there on our first layer. Let me hit A. Let me hit Control C. Let me go to our Material tab, look at what we've been ignoring, make sure they're all selected, and hit X. Now I'm going to hit Control V. One thing we'd really like to do with this volume material is make it volume. It no longer needs to be emission. It now needs to Shift S, switch type to volume scatter, not absorption. I kind of make that mistake every once in a while. And in volume scatter, I would change the anisotroposity to -0.1 and put the density to crazy high, like 120. The default is 1, and that's kind of weird. Put the shader from surface to volume, and because the light is shining on it, you'll see it. If the light is not shining on it, you'll barely see anything, and you'll think your density is wrong. So make sure that this volume is on the same layer as a light. Alright? And then what I can do to make this a little bit more blatant is bring back in the strength of my environment. Now let me go back to these materials because I have a way to hide the second one that we used to inform our volume material. drag your transparent shader output into the surface node of material output. That makes it transparent. That means that the only thing that you're looking at right now is, in fact, the volume scattering volume of the cloud. And so, you see what happened there? I got a complete preview of how thick my clouds and whatnot were going to be because I cheated using cloud cards. Now, maybe my render's not happy enough. My CPU, GPU isn't happy enough to render out all these clouds. Then what I can do, once again, is drag my transparent output into the surface node of material output for volume, pop back over to the other one, reinstate the good stuff there is. Now, because it's emission, I kind of want to turn my environment down so that I can see it. And here is part 2 of the trick. The reason we used an empty is because we want to have a predictable amount of noise and chew into the potential location of that hemisphere. But the good news about the hemisphere is we can squash it. What? Yeah. In object mode, the scale of this object is 111. When we change the scale in edit mode and go back to object mode, the scale remains 111. We actually don't want that. Part of this trick is scaling it not in edit mode, but in object mode. So S to scale, Shift Z to constrain the scale along the X and Y, and now my MRI slices tell me that instead of just having a few popcorn clouds on a perfectly round hemisphere that was circular, my scale is all goofy, 4.277, 4.277, and 1, because I scaled in object mode. Do not reset your scale. Do not hit Control A, apply scale, because you will reanalyze the mapping and you'll blow the whole, you'll blow my magic, is what I'm saying. Let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, and let's see if we can get a preview of what happened to our hemisphere. Where's that hemisphere? Here it is. This is what happened to it. It got long. It got long. These are the MRI slices. Shift Control left click gives us a preview of whatever node we left click. These are the MR slices inside that stretched domain. Because that stretched domain and those MRI slices are the same object, you always get a preview of what the volume will do. And you can move it side to side, and you can determine if, in fact, that sense of depth is working for you. What did I do with the... Oh, I closed the movie? That wasn't fun. The sense of depth can be alluded to going up the face of a mountain using just these card tricks. Ooh, I like that. They're card tricks for volume. And if ever someone takes you to task and says, man, that's fake, it's not fake. I'll bet you've used this card trick before, but never actually bothered to stick it inside the potential for real volume. So this gives you a preview, and it gives you a card trick, and it can change your life. Make your render times even better, make everything a whole lot happier. So these are great little popcorn clouds. Let me see if I could further eat away at these, make sure I'm on the right material, which is V2. Pull this, they get a little dimmer, and pull this. Maybe, you know what, I'm going to make sure for our example here they really scream white. I'll put this up and I'll make more larger clouds. It's a little confusing because we're working with negatives. We're taking away from the potential. You'll figure it out on your own. Anyway, these are now instructions that I can copy and paste to the actual volume material. I don't have to like just memorize it. So you can hit A to deselect everything, hit the letter C, and touch the things that you changed. I only touched those two, I only changed those two. Your circle select works in your node editor too. So Control C. So easy. And the big important thing is that your empty didn't squash and change. So that noise remains consistent throughout. Any change to that noise happens uniquely on these pieces. So let's turn V2 off by dragging the transparent shader into surface. And now with our change settings, let's turn our volume on. Yeah, I wish there was a switch, but there's not. This way, it already looks pretty cool. When you render out the clouds, remember? Our sphere has been squashed halfway down that domain. So our clouds may not appear where you really want them to be, but you know, I'm sure you'll cope. Let's get just close enough to see what's happening with these clouds. I'm going to change my samples up. So, true volume, lots of bounces, good bounces inside the volume if you wish, and do this on a layer and play with your colors, and as soon as you put in a ground, this whole thing changes because the light bounces back up onto the clouds. And what's the other info? Under the geometry tab here, you get volume sampling. I've found that a step size of 0.1 and maximum steps of 1024 really are ideal for almost every situation. Remember that you can take a teeny slice and render out a teeny slice. Remember also that if you want to test the motion of volume, don't render your whole animation. I did this. I actually have one where the fog on the bottom is just like screaming like a jet fighter from right to left, and it looks totally silly because I made a mistake. I just went and rendered the whole 52 seconds. And my render time got up to about 7.5 seconds per frame at 40 samples. And so times 1250 is this. And that's in minutes, and then this is in hours. So 2.6 hours wasted when all I had to do to test the motion of my volume was select an end frame here that was only 1 second away. That would have taken a lot of pain out of one of my days. So there's so many ways to be smart about volume and preview it, and when you use volume, you are able to create something that looks more professional, even on something as ridiculously simple. Ooh, look at that. My video card is like, no thank you. Okay, stop rendering that. Even something as simple as these pine trees with the fog coming up the mountain. If you were to use a smoke simulation in a domain covering all of that space, you would lose your mind because your calculations would happen so much. So this card trick is really magnificent. My phrase was what? Tricky cloud cards in Blender to visualize volumetrics. So not only do they visualize it and they help you set up the material for perfect volumes without all the experimentation wasted in time, but they translate right over to volume if in fact you need to change the whole layout of everything and use real volume. I hope that inspires some people. I hope that you kind of dig that and get an idea of changing your simple things into complex things. Watch over here on the left as it jumps back to the beginning. Boom! Cloud cover in the distance. It's marvelous. And you could still use your mist pass to enhance everything. That's a real easy way. So this trick, this card trick, is something that I hope you get a kick out of and you can use. I have appreciated your comments, your likes, and follows, subscriptions. Hello Hyola5 is available on Twitter. I don't often say that, but there it is. If you wanted to just watch along, I've taken a 3-month break. I'm back. And maybe one day we'll talk about why I took a 3-month break. Probably not. Let's just keep blending. Hey man, thanks for watching.